A hot-headed cop shoves an elderly craftsman, striking him for refusing to be rushed. The officer, drunk on power, has no idea the old man's son is Steven Seagal, and he's about to collect a debt of pain and respect. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, honeyed glow across Prescott Square, filtering through the broad leaves of ancient oak trees. It was the final hour of the city's annual artisan and craft exposition, and a mood of pleasant, weary satisfaction settled over the crowd. The air hummed with the gentle murmur of conversations, the rustle of paper bags, and the distant melody of a lone guitarist. Here, amidst the cobblestones and historic brick facades, value was measured not in dollars, but in the skill of human hands. No hands were more skilled than Arthur Seagal's. At 72, he was a living legend in the woodworking community. His stall, a simple but elegant setup of dark velvet cloth over a sturdy oak table, was a pilgrimage site for enthusiasts. On it lay his creations, impossibly intricate puzzle boxes carved from bird's-eye maple, smooth, flowing sculptures of polished mahogany, and delicate animal figures that seemed to breathe with life. A blue ribbon, proclaiming him Artisan of the Year, was pinned discreetly to the corner of his tablecloth. He was a man of quiet dignity, his face a roadmap of laugh lines and concentration, his hands gnarled but steady. For Arthur, the world made sense through the grain of wood and the patient, deliberate process of bringing forth its hidden beauty. This world of patience and beauty was about to collide with one of brutish haste. Officer Kincaid moved through the thinning crowd like a shark through a school of fish. He was young, broad-shouldered, and wore his uniform like a suit of armor, his chin thrust forward with an air of belligerent authority. Tapped for crowd-clearing duty, he saw the peaceful artisans not as people, but as obstacles. His voice, a sharp bark, cut through the calm. "All right, let's pack it up, people. Show's over. I want this square cleared in 30 minutes, he shouted, tapping his baton against a lamppost for emphasis. A few vendors flinched and began to hurry, their movements suddenly clumsy. Arthur Seagal paid him no mind. He was carefully wrapping a small, carved fox in a piece of soft flannel. Each piece was a part of him, and each deserved a gentle departure. He worked with the unhurried grace of a man who has mastered his craft and respects its rhythms. He was vaguely aware of the commotion, but it was just noise, a distraction from the important task at hand. He reached into the pocket of his worn canvas vest, retrieving his phone. It was time to call his son. Steven had insisted on picking him up, dismissing Arthur's attempts to call a cab with a familiar, firm affection. That was his boy, unfailingly loyal, fiercely protective. A small smile touched Arthur's lips as he found the contact in his phone. He was about to press the call button when a shadow fell over his table. "Didn't you hear me, old man? I said pack it up." Arthur looked up slowly, his eyes meeting Officer Kincaid's. They were cold, impatient eyes, devoid of any curiosity or respect. "I heard you, officer," Arthur replied, his voice calm and even. "Good things take time. These pieces are delicate." Kincaid sneered, his gaze sweeping over the intricate carvings with open contempt. "Looks like a bunch of firewood to me. You have 5 minutes to clear this junk out, or I start writing citations." Arthur's calm was a fortress Kincaid seemed determined to breach. It was a quiet defiance the officer couldn't tolerate. "There's no need for threats," Arthur said, placing the wrapped fox gently into a wooden crate. "Patience is a virtue, son. You may find some use for it one day." The word "son" seemed to flick a switch in Kincaid's brain. His face darkened. "Don't you call me son. It's officer. Let me see your vendor permit. Now." He was fishing, trying to find a crack in the old man's composure. Without a word, Arthur reached into a small leather satchel and produced the laminated permit, handing it over. Kincaid snatched it from his hand, studying it as if searching for a flaw. Finding none, his frustration grew. He thrust the permit back at Arthur. "You're holding up my operation. I want you and your little trinkets gone." "I will be gone," Arthur said, his voice still level but with a new edge of steel, "when I am finished. He turned his back on Kincaid, a clear dismissal, and picked up his phone again to call Steven. That was the final insult to Kincaid's inflated ego. His authority, in his mind, had been publicly challenged by a frail old man. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through him. He took a step forward and shoved Arthur hard in the shoulder. "I said now." The shove sent Arthur stumbling sideways. A small, unfinished bird carving, resting on the edge of the table, was knocked to the cobblestones, shattering with a sickening crackle of splintering wood. Arthur froze, his gaze fixed on the broken pieces of what would have been a meadowlark. He straightened up slowly, his entire body trembling with a quiet, profound anger. He turned to face the officer, his eyes no longer calm, but blazing. "You had no right," he whispered, the words cutting through the air. For Kincaid, this was the last gasp of defiance. He saw red. With a vicious snarl, he swung. The back of his hand cracked across Arthur's cheek with a sound that was sharp and ugly, a sound that didn't belong in the peaceful square. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Time seemed to stop. The guitarist's melody died. All eyes were on Arthur Seagal, who had staggered back against his stall, one hand to his rapidly reddening cheek, his expression a mixture of shock, pain, and disbelief. Then, as if a spell was broken, a dozen cell phones were raised, their small red recording lights blinking to life in the fading sunlight. Just as the first murmurs of outrage began to ripple through the crowd, a new sound sliced through the tension, the low, powerful growl of a high-performance engine. A black SUV, sleek and menacing as a panther, glided to a stop at the edge of the square. It wasn't parked, it was positioned. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped Steven Seagal. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. His presence alone was enough to change the very atmosphere of the square. He was a mountain in motion, his large frame cloaked in a simple black leather jacket, his boots hitting the cobblestones with a slow, deliberate weight that seemed to make the ground vibrate. The crowd, which had started to press forward, instinctively parted for him, a silent wave receding from an unstoppable force. His eyes, dark and unreadable, took in the scene in an instant. They scanned past the shocked faces, past the pointing phones, and locked onto the figure of his father, standing bruised and shaken beside his display of beautiful, wounded art. Then, his gaze shifted, moving with glacial slowness until it rested on Officer Kincaid, who still stood puffed up with the fading adrenaline of his assault. Kincaid, blinded by his own arrogance, didn't recognize the world-famous martial artist. He just saw a big man with a serious expression, another citizen to be put in his place. "Move along," he barked, gesturing dismissively. "This is official police business. Nothing to see here." Steven didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply continued his slow, inexorable walk forward until he was just a few feet away. His shadow fell over Kincaid, a sudden eclipse blotting out the sun. He said nothing. He just looked from Kincaid to his father. It was Arthur who broke the silence. He lowered the hand from his face, revealing the angry red welt. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent square with perfect clarity. "Steven, he hit me. It was the only trigger needed." The stillness in Steven erupted into focused, devastating motion. Kincaid, seeing the shift, instinctively raised his hands. "You want to get involved? You're obstructing him." His words were cut off. Steven's left hand shot out, not in a punch, but in a precise, fluid grab, seizing the front of Kincaid's uniform. With a single, effortless twist of his body, he used the officer's own forward momentum to unbalance him, pulling him forward like a child. Kincaid stumbled, his face a mask of sudden panic. "This man," Steven growled, his voice a low, guttural rumble, "builds things with his hands. He creates beauty." He spun Kincaid around, controlling him completely, and slammed him back against the solid bronze plaque of the city's founding monument. The impact sent a dull clang echoing through the square. Kincaid's head snapped back, his breath driven from his lungs in a sharp gasp. "All you know how to do," Steven hissed, leaning in close, his voice dripping with contempt, "is break them." He delivered a single, open-handed palm strike to Kincaid's chest. It wasn't a blow meant to maim, but to utterly dominate. It was the strike of a master, short, sharp, and overwhelming. The force lifted Kincaid off his feet and he crumpled to the ground, landing in a heap at the base of the monument, conscious but completely incapacitated, gasping for air. The crowd, silent until now, erupted. It wasn't in fear, but in a cathartic roar of approval and awe. This wasn't a brawl, it was a reckoning. It was justice, delivered with the brutal elegance of an art form. The cheers had barely subsided when the wail of sirens pierced the air, growing rapidly closer. Within a minute, 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt, their flashing red and blue lights painting the historic square in frantic, strobing colors. 4 officers emerged, hands hovering near their holsters, their expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm as they took in the bizarre scene, a fellow officer on the ground, a crowd of cheering civilians, and the imposing, motionless figure of Steven Seagal standing over him. An older, grizzled officer with sergeant stripes on his sleeve took the lead. "What the hell happened here?" he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years on the force. Before Kincaid could gasp out his own twisted version of events, the crowd surged forward, becoming a chorus of witnesses. "He assaulted that old man," a young woman shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Kincaid. "He hit him. For no reason. He was just packing up his things," another vendor added. "We've all got it on video," a man yelled, holding up his phone. "Every second of it." The sergeant, a man named Diaz, held up a hand to quiet the cacophony. His gaze shifted from the sprawled Kincaid to the calm, stoic Arthur, who was now being attended to by a fellow artisan. Finally, his eyes landed on Steven. He recognized him instantly, and a look of weary understanding crossed his face. This was not going to be a simple affair. "Is that true?" Diaz asked, his question directed at Steven, though his eyes scanned the crowd, weighing their unified story. Steven didn't answer directly. He simply nodded toward his father. "Ask him what happened. Then check their phones. The truth is there." As his partners cautiously approached Kincaid, helping him into a sitting position, Diaz walked over to Arthur. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" "I'll be fine," Arthur said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "But that officer, he has a sickness in him. A sickness of power." At that moment, the young journalist who had been covering the fair for a local blog stepped forward, her own phone held out. "Sergeant Diaz, I have the entire incident recorded in high definition." From the moment Officer Kincaid approached him to the moment he struck him. Diaz looked at the screen she offered, his expression hardening as he watched the brief, damning footage. He saw Kincaid's aggression, Arthur's calm, and the unprovoked, ugly strike. He looked over at Kincaid, who was now protesting weakly, "He assaulted me, that man attacked an officer." Diaz had seen enough. He walked over to Kincaid, his face a mask of cold disappointment. "Get on your feet, Kincaid." "Sarge, I said, on your feet." Diaz's voice left no room for argument. When Kincaid was standing, unsteady and disbelieving, Diaz turned him around. "Douglas Kincaid, you are under arrest for assault." The click of handcuffs snapping shut was louder than any gunshot. A wave of applause and relief washed over the square. Justice, formal and undeniable, had arrived. Steven watched it all unfold, his arms crossed over his chest, before turning his full attention back to the only thing that mattered. He walked to his father's side, his large hand gently resting on Arthur's shoulder. "Let's go home, Dad." The story, dubbed "The Craftsman and the Cop" by the media, exploded online. The footage, captured from a dozen different angles, was undeniable and went viral overnight. It wasn't just a story about a celebrity intervention, it was a stark, clear narrative about the abuse of power against quiet dignity. Officer Kincaid's career ended not with a whisper, but with a resounding crash. Faced with irrefutable video evidence and public outrage, he was swiftly convicted, stripped of his badge, and sentenced to serve time. The Prescott Police Department, shamed into action, launched a mandatory de-escalation and community respect initiative. Weeks later, the noise had faded. The world had moved on to the next headline. But in Arthur Seagal's workshop, the world was quiet. The air smelled of cedar and sawdust. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars. Arthur sat on his stool, a piece of light-grained birchwood in his hands. He was slowly, patiently, sanding its surface, his movements as practiced and peaceful as a monk's prayer. The bruise on his cheek had long since faded, but the memory of the incident remained, a faint scar on the peaceful tapestry of his life. Steven leaned against the doorway, watching him. He had refused every interview, every offer to tell his side of the story. It was never about him. He had come to the workshop every day, not talking much, just being there, watching his father transform rough wood into things of beauty. It was a form of healing for them both. Without looking up, Arthur spoke. A man's character is not defined by the blows he takes, but by what he chooses to build afterward. He held up the piece he was working on. It was a small, perfect meadowlark, its wings poised for flight, a flawless replica of the one Kincaid had destroyed. He held it out to his son. Steven walked forward and took it, his large, powerful hands cradling the delicate object with immense care. He looked from the bird to his father, and a deep, unspoken understanding passed between them. The fight was over. The rage had subsided, replaced by a quiet, resilient strength. Some battles are fought with fists and fury. The most important ones are fought to protect the creators, the builders, the quiet souls who make the world a more beautiful place. And that is a battle worth fighting. This story proves that true strength lies in creation, not destruction. Comment with respect to honor all the quiet creators in the world. What would you do to defend your family's honor? Share this story as a stand against bullies, and subscribe for more powerful tales of justice.